Right, welcome back everybody. So that conversation continues now. Zimbabwe's political stalemate between the ruling ZANU PF and its opposition, the movement for democratic change, has stifled the advancement of healthy democratic processes in the country. In December, former South African President Thabo Mbeki was in Zimbabwe at Mnangagwa's invitation. Mbeki met the two presidents, ZANU PF's Emmerson Mnangagwa and MDC's Nelson Chamisa, separately. Subsequent to the meetings, President Managua met with the leaders of opposition parties, but the MDC was not a part of that meeting. Meanwhile, Zimbabwe is dealing with a deepening economic crisis, which is now compounded by the worst drought ever in the region. Nelson Chamisa, president of the Movement for Democratic Change, is in South Africa seeking political solutions in the Zim crisis, and we continue our conversation with him. Thank you for your patience. Thanks for staying on with us here on the program.
Thank you.
Have you ever met with President Mnangagwa?
Well, I've not met with President Mnangagwa since the days of Parliament. In fact, it's now almost 2 years, which is quite sad because under normal circumstances, people who compete in an election are supposed to then have a conversation post an election to find a way forward for the country. This is one of my saddest moments and very disappointing development, that you go into an election, you just meet through the ballot. Beyond the ballot, you're not able to converse or communicate. And that's why we thought that President Mbeki, when he came, he would facilitate for a conversation. As you know, in Africa, wherever there's a negotiation, even a marriage negotiation, there has to be a negotiator, because that's our nature as a people. So, of course, for us to be able to deal with the acrimony, the disharmony, and the misunderstanding between ourselves and Mr. Mnangagwa, it would be useful to have a credible negotiator. And we think that the avenue and platform created by President Mbeki would go a long way to creating this kind of conversation.
There's talk, and perhaps you can confirm it with me, that Mbeki may very well be returning this month. Well, we nearly finished this month, but I imagine early next month to Zimbabwe to carry on this dialogue and perhaps get the two of you together. Are you aware of this? Do you have details?
Yes, I've been informed that there is that indication. And we've even emphasized that it's even more urgent now than ever before, because the situation in the country is really taking a nosedive and things are going down south in many ways. Right now, as we speak, people's salaries are being eroded. As we speak, we do not have electricity. As we speak, the situation has gone out of hand, with unemployment hitting almost 98%. Young people who are industrious, Zimbabweans who are hardworking, peace-loving, gifted, are all lacking everything, basically in issues of survival. And I've always made this point, that in Zimbabwe, we lack everything in leadership, but have everything in resources, and that continues to be our biggest problem.
Yeah. Mr. Chamisa, however, you have been blamed for being a part of the devastating situation in Zimbabwe. And the reason I say this is that you've been very vocal, urging the Western world, America, European Union, to continue with sanctions against Zimbabwe. And this is hurting and throttling your nation. And people are not happy that you keep on calling for that. Why do you keep calling for sanctions?
You will never have my voice behind calling for any measure or sanction against Zimbabwe. What we have made clear in emphatic a voice is to say that we need good governance in the country. We need to make sure that we have engagement at a national level. We correct issues of human rights abuses. We correct issues of governance. We correct issues of dealing with corruption within our own system. Once we clear our own yard and our own backyard, we know that all the other issues of international engagement are going to be a walk in the park.
So let me just get this clear. You personally have never called for sanctions. Reports of you calling for sanctions are false.
That's all propaganda by our colleagues in ZANU PF, who believe that they would harvest political capital out of lies. And lying has become part of their default setting. We have no business to call for any measure against the country. But we know that the behavior of ZANU PF has made Zimbabwe difficult to govern. In fact, it is ZANU PF that has made Zimbabwe ungovernable through human rights abuses, through attacks on civic society, through attacks on trade union leaders, attacks on the MDC. As I speak, almost half of my leaders have treason charges trumped up by ZANU PF. As I speak, we control 28 cities, of the 32 cities and towns we have in the country. But we are being treated like a banned organization. Our programs being prohibited, our activities being prohibited, police ransacking and coming to search our offices for weapons of war, when in fact we are peace-loving and consistent. So those are the issues that have attracted a banana republic tag on the country. And it has nothing to do with the MDC. So you can't blame the victim for your own misfortunes. We are the victims of dictatorship, the victims of a failed state, the victims of arrested development in the country on account of rigged elections, brutality, and rogue regime that we have in the country.
So there are many different, and it is very difficult to look through the noise, because you do realize that there are a lot of people that are writing articles that may very well be writing for the ZANU PF, but there is one particular narrative that is running right through all of this, is that you are the one calling for the sanctions. It is a very loud message that's being pushed through, as you say, perhaps from members of the ZANU PF. I'm not too sure that they're saying that your stance is the same as homegrown terrorism, is that you advocate more violence rather than going in and joining POLAD, joining these discussions, stopping the sanctions against the country, and ensuring that Zimbabwe can try and grow and try and get some peaceful resolutions. So there is this narrative. In fact, I'd like to even get one confirmation from you. I even saw something where there was an accusation that you called for the US Special Forces to invade Zimbabwe. This was in 2004 or 2007. I'm sure you've heard this before.
Well, that's all propaganda. And of course, like I said, our emphasis is to have Zimbabwe returning to legitimacy and good governance. All these things that are being said around sanctions, around MDC playing a role, we have no business in what ZANU PF has invited upon themselves. What we have done and what we continue to call for is action in good governance, action in restoration of democracy, action in dealing with the problems that we have. Mr. Mnangagwa has said Zimbabwe is open for business, but Zimbabwe can't be open for business when it is not open for citizens' rights, when it is not open for the freedoms of the people, when it is not open for democracy. And that is what we continue to say. It has nothing to do with the MDC having called for any external country. In any event, what sanctions are there against Zimbabwe?
You could tell me more in terms of these sanctions.
Of course, they say this is propaganda.
Yeah.
They say the European Union has lifted all forms of restrictive measures on Zimbabwe, and I know that there's dialogue that is taking place.
Yeah, yeah.
Right now, the United States of America is in conversations with Zimbabwe, so I don't understand. There are, of course, calls for Zimbabwe to be on a path to democracy, to continue to tick all the boxes on good governance, human rights, dealing with corruption, and dealing with fundamental reforms. And that continues to be our call, and that is what we are calling for, particularly in the context of the dialogue that we envisage.
Governance is something that you keep on emphasizing, poor governance in Zimbabwe.
Sure.
Corruption is at the heart of a lot of poor governance. Now, I mean, there's suspicions and reports that former President of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, has got millions of dollars stashed in overseas properties and all over the world. You know, while the country is so poor and people are desperate, as you say, people don't even have food to put on their table. There is no maize meal. So getting that money back, stopping corruption, how do you go about trying to do that?
Well, for us, it's, like I said, it's politics stupid. It's all about governance. You know, we as Zimbabweans, like I said, we have all the resources, over 60 mineral resources in our country, but they will mean nothing until and unless we're able to unlock the full value by preparing our country for accountability, for good governance. That can only happen when we've fixed the politics. Good politics attracts good business. Good politics invites a conducive environment for economic success and economic prosperity. But until we are able to resolve our political issues, we will not be able to cure the issue of deficits in trust, good governance, rule of law, protection of rights on property. Those are the issues we need to deal with. And once we start doing that, we'll then be able to have an accountable government. And this is the plan we've always had as MDC, that when we come in, we need to put the country on a smart platform of accountability, of good governance, but also of strong and very important roles that have to be played by state institutions to slow down and also sort of roll back the frontiers of corruption in the country. And we have done well in the local authorities to at least show that we can make a difference, and that's what we continue to show.
Mr. Chamisa, very quickly, our final question here this morning. South Africa has taken over the chairmanship of the AU. The AU is an organization that actually went ahead and called the elections, or they endorsed the elections. Both SADC, AU and Chamisa both endorsed the elections. Your next elections are coming up in 2023. So it's a while to go with a country that is suffering at this rate. As chairman of the AU, how do you think South Africa can help?
Yes, but just to say earlier, 2023 is out of the question. We will not be able to have 2023 until we resolve modern day questions. Today's questions are so pertinent to be resolved. So what we need to do is to resolve the unresolved 2018 disputed election so that we pave way for any future elections. Otherwise, we'll continue to have a recycling of the same old problems, a vicious cycle that has to be kept in having free and fair elections. But what is also interesting in the context of Zimbabwe is that we now have new evidence, fresh evidence after the Constitutional Court determination of the dispute between ourselves and Mr. Mnangagwa, particularly in the ZEC report, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission report that was put in Parliament, wherein the Commission is indicating that they flouted the law and the procedures of holding of elections in announcing the results of the election. That evidence has to be at the doorstep of SADC, the AU, and of course South Africa President Ramaphosa to show and validate the fact that indeed elections in Zimbabwe were rigged and were stolen. And what we then need to do going forward in the context of the AU and SADC is to make sure that we have comprehensive reforms. We are able to then have free and fair elections so that we do not have a repeat of 2018 in 2023. Otherwise, we'll continue to be having Zimbabwe on the table of SADC, on the table of South Africa, if not at the doorstep of South Africa, as a gadfly and as a nuisance, which is not what is desirable.
We leave it there. Nelson Chamisa, thank you very much for talking to us here on Morning Live. President of the Movement for Democratic Change. He is in South Africa currently trying to talk to leaders, seek political solutions to the crisis in our neighboring country, Zimbabwe. Let's take a break. We'll see you after this.